Okay, I guess I just read that book. Ready Player Two by Ernest Cline. Why did I finish that? I'm really not sure. I mean, I think I know a little bit. I was sucked in by the world, but the book was bad. Like, I cannot recommend this book. This has got to be one of the worst books that I've read in the past year. I mean, why was this book written is kind of my main thing. Like, was it just a money grab? Did they say, "Hey, we want to do another movie, write a book," and he's like, "Okay." The whole thing was so derivative. It was just the first book over, but more like woke, but also weird being woke. And Wade is now terrible, like the worst protagonist ever that we're supposed to cheer for just because the story follows him. Oh man, this book was bad. So other characters were okay. Wade was awful. Wade was terrible. Did not cheer for him the entire time. Motivations of the characters very questionable. Seemed like the plot was just pushing people along and people did things because the plot demanded that we do it. I was skimming massive chunks of this book because the 80s references are just shoveled down your throat. The first book, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of references. That's kind of the brand of Ready Player One, and that's why it was fun and that's why a lot of people liked it. This one, it didn't have any of the fun or the nuance to the references. It was just like, okay, we're doing this reference thing now. This is the level. So I'm going to throw every single thing that could possibly be related to what we're doing. And you're going to not understand any of it unless you're a child of the 80s, which I'm not. So, I mean, maybe if you're 10 years older than me, you get into it a little bit more. Man, okay, I just skimmed massive chunks of this because I didn't care what was going on and the references were just crazy way too much. Yeah, not a good way to structure a story. The Oasis itself is still cool. The sci-fi stuff is still interesting. And that's probably why I kept on reading. I just wanted to know what happened. I liked the setting. If it existed in real life, I would love it. Some of the sci-fi ideas are interesting. The writing is decent. It's a fast-paced book, so it's not hard to continue reading, but also it's hard because it's so cringe the entire time, all the way through. This book gets 3.5 out of 10. That's the lowest rating I've ever given a book on this channel. Yeah, it's probably the worst book that I've reviewed since doing Fantology, and we've done over 100 now. So, pretty low bar. Thanks, Ernest Cline. Ready Player 2 was awful. Okay, spoilers now. The plot, okay, same thing, except now there's shards. Same thing as Ready Player 1. Now there's shards, and some of these shards are uber boring. There is the Prince world shard. Okay, unless you're a huge Prince fan, which I'm not. I mean, I guess if you are a huge Prince fan, maybe you loved this chapter or chapters. It was a long time, and this was a pretty big point in the book as the clock was ticking down and we were losing characters. But I just skimmed the entire thing because I had no idea what was going on, because I have like limited familiarity with Prince. And I guess, if I liked Prince more, that's maybe on me a little bit. But at the same time, what are you expecting from your readers? Like, these references are just shoveled down your throat. The Pretty in Pink section, I understood more of those references because I've seen more of those movies, but there's a lot of movies in that section, and I haven't seen all of them. I'm not a child of the 80s, so maybe that's why I didn't like it as much. But even that part was, there was a lot of skimming. When I did see a reference that I actually understood, I was like, hey, yeah, that's awesome. That's kind of how reference books and movies are. That's why they're fun. But there were just so many. There were way too many of them. This was sloppily done. I'm sorry. Okay, my main criticism of the book. Wade is freaking terrible. He's got to be the most unlikable protagonist that I've read in some time. He is just this awful rich baby. He's fine with infringing upon anything that is sacred as long as it makes sense for him and he can justify it. He's forgiven way too easily at the end. All of his friends, especially Artemis, are right with what they're saying. He is making terrible choices and being irresponsible. And the AI that he is pushing has potential for really bad effects. But Wade continues to justify it the whole time, all the way until the end, when even though everything that Artemis and friends said might happen happens and everything goes terrible, he is somehow redeemed. He's not redeemed in my eyes, but he's somehow forgiven. Somehow it's fine. Somehow Artemis loves him again, even though there was zero reconciliation between them. There was like one conversation where he says, "I'm sorry." And she says, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that you would say that. I love you now." And throughout the course of this one day where they have to save the world, now everything is fine. That is terrible writing. That is so lazy. Wade is such a terrible character, and the other characters are terrible for interacting with him in this way. Artemis is a good character. Some of the other characters are decent, but the fact that they have to act towards Wade in the way that the plot demands they do makes all of the characters bad in my eyes, and the plot just awful. This is terrible. The other thing that I hate about Wade and the book in general is it's like pseudo woke in this weird way, as if Ernest Cline just read through Twitter and marked down like, okay, here's all of the things that I need to be mindful of and all of the important issues of today, which I agree with. Like, these are important things that we need to talk about. We need to talk about racism. We need to talk about homophobia. We need to talk about transgender rights, etc., and climate change and the potential for the disastrous effects of AI. All of these things are important things. However, this is handled so clumsily, as if Ernest Cline is just saying, here are all of the things, we're throwing them out there. Wade, our protagonist, our hero, likes all of these things. He accepts all of these things. And this is a way we're going to show how noble he is and how much you should like him, because he is behind all of these issues. And so should you. And also, I'm going to hit you over the head with a baseball bat as you read through the first 70 plus pages of this book, and throughout the rest of the book. It does get a little bit better. But man, it was so weird at first. And I say pseudo woke because it's apparent that Ernest Cline doesn't really understand these issues all that well. There are some weird, especially with the transgender stuff and sex stuff, there are some weird things where he is going through on the ONIs and marking down like, okay, here are the types of sex that you can experience. Male with male, female, female, and then non-binary sex with different genders. And it's almost like he's saying, okay, we're reducing the transgender identity to how they experience sex. And this has been talked about on other reviews, and I'm kind of stealing this idea a little bit, but gosh, it just kind of illustrates how out of tune this whole book seems to be. I feel like if you are just someone who goes through Twitter and is mindlessly attached to these issues, you're gonna like nod your head and be like, yeah, this is great. Like, okay, this author's getting behind all these important things. But if you actually read below the surface level, it's clear that it's not really the way that we should handle these things. Another example, with Lord of the Rings, there are some not too subtle accusations of racism towards Lord of the Rings, which I totally disagree with. And I don't want to get into a larger conversation here, but Tolkien was not racist. There is extensive research into this. And yes, I understand that the orcs are darker skinned and everyone else in the books and in the show is lighter skinned. That doesn't mean that you are racist. It just means that's how you've structured your story. In Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter, a fantastic new series where all of the characters are Black and of African descent. I mean, it's a speculative fiction, so it's not really, it's based in a different world, but that is obviously the impetus for the story. In that book, that's not racist. That's just how he's portraying the characters. And like Lord of the Rings, that's not racist if they're all white. It just means that that's like Tolkien's universe here. And I'm sorry if you're not representative 100% in all of these books, but I don't think you can expect to. It's too much to put on authors to say that every single different identity and race needs to be represented in your books. Authors are going to write what they are familiar with, and they're not going to write things that they're not familiar with for good reason, because they don't want to do it incorrectly. And so if you're saying Tolkien is racist, like, I'm sorry, you are out of touch, and I really disagree with your argument. I didn't mean to get into such a big thing there, but that really bugged me. That one line just really kind of illustrates this whole thing. Okay, the climate change stuff, that was like maybe a little better, but at the same time, all of these warnings and things were happening. And then at the end of the book, it didn't ever mean anything. No important change was enacted. It was just like, oh, Wade was actually okay. And actually, the Oasis and the ONI devices are okay. And we're just going to like tough it out and get through it. And we're going to blast the rocket ship off into space with the virtual colony, which was cool, by the way, one of the sci-fi ideas that I liked. But that represents that we're going to stay behind on Earth and we're going to fix everything. And Artemis was right the whole time, but also she's apologizing to Wade. What? Okay, the Holiday Kira plotline, that was also just weird. Not interested in this old creepy stalker dude that's driving the plot along. So many things just cringe throughout the whole book. It was just cringe. The writing was okay. It moved you along well enough. Klein is a decent writer. That was fine with me. I have no criticisms there. The positives, if you're still watching, there were a few positives. I thought the sci-fi ideas were cool. I thought, like I said, blasting the clones off in the virtual world was a cool idea. I thought the ONI devices it was fun to think about. Like, it would be really cool to experience the Oasis fully and have all of those senses. And the Oasis itself is an awesome idea. And I think that's why I kept on reading, really. Deep down at heart, I am a huge nerd. And if the Oasis existed, I would totally be there. So I want to hear everything I can about it, even though all of the other plot around it was so cringe. So overall, I'm really just mad because this could have been such a cool book, and the Oasis is a cool idea. The sci-fi ideas were very interesting. I enjoyed reading about them. However, it became a Twitter caused bomb right from the beginning that was handled terribly. Nothing meaningful ever happened with these important issues, and it seemed very surface level. And the hero that was around the entire thing was just terrible. I hated him. I wanted him to lose. I wanted him to end up being the villain. None of that happened. Didn't make any sense that Artemis and everyone else loved him at the end. So 3.5 out of 10. Gosh, okay, I'm on to reading something better now. If you want to see more of Phantology, like, subscribe below, do the whole thing. The description below contains links that you might want to follow if you want to see more of us.